We're excited to have you join us today. My name is Will Lubetkin. I'm the VP of Sales Engineering here at Aristotle. This is our fourth and final webinar during the month of August. Today we'll be covering the Aristotle Lobby Survey Tool and how it can be streamlined and enhance your organization's lobby reporting. Joining me on the call today, several staff from Aristotle. First is David Mason, former FC Chairman and Commissioner. He'll be sharing a live demonstration of the Lobby Survey Tool. Laura Bailey will be assisting with the chat and helping make sure we answer your questions throughout the webinar. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure that your phones, computers are muted. This will help limit distracting background noise. Also, please use the chat box if you have any questions. My colleague, Laura Bailey, will be monitoring the chat and making sure we can answer any that come up. And finally, we'll be recording the webinar and we'll follow up with all attendees after the session with a link to the recorded video. With that, Laura, any questions so far?
Will, no questions at this time.
Great. Dave, it looks like we're ready to get started. Take it away.
Thanks, Laura and Will. And the purpose of the webinar today is to talk about how we collect information for the federal LDA in particular. This tool is also applicable to state lobbying information collection efforts. I'm going to talk a little bit at the outset about the substantive requirements of the LDA, and I'd be happy to entertain questions about those if they come up, but we're mostly thinking about the information collection requirements. And for the federal LDA, they're fairly complex. We have to collect the issues you lobby on, the issue areas, time, costs, some other reportable payments, and some certifications. You need to collect all of that. Of course, for state reports, the requirements vary by state. Give me the next slide. So the LDA reporting requirements, we have these general issue areas, the agencies you lobbied, houses of Congress, your specific lobbying issues, the names of your listed lobbyists, and the JAC Act certification that says your lobbyists haven't been convicted of certain felonies, or if they have, to disclose those. And you also have to include a cost total, which I'll get into a little bit more later. And then you have semi-annual reports that require you to list your PAC contributions, honorific and other payments, inaugural committees and things like that, and to provide a gift rule certification. Next slide. So for companies with in-house lobbyists, the LDA requires you to calculate the time that employees spend on lobbying activities, and that's defined fairly broadly, even if those employees are not lobbyists because they're below the 20% threshold for listing on the report as lobbyists. So what that means is that a lot of companies have a first hour reporting requirement for all of their employees, and that goes from support staff all the way up to the CEO. And some of our clients have to contact hundreds of employees per quarter to identify whether they have spent any time, for instance, talking to people on Capitol Hill or providing support for their lobbyists. You also have to report the lobbying portion of your trade association dues and certain subscription and information services. Next slide. Some of the examples of items you might need to capture and report would be a CEO trip to Washington to meet with members of Congress or people on the White House staff, including the president. Employee participation in a trade association board or committee meeting that's focused on lobbying, even if that employee never does lobbying directly, because participation planning efforts for the lobbying activities of others is itself defined as a lobbying activity, so you need to collect that time. Employee participation in a live or virtual fly-in, and that would apply whether it was one sponsored by your organization or sponsored by a professional organization the employee belongs to or a trade association your company belongs to. Employees' phone conversation with a congressional staffer on any official topic. Employee emails to Congress via action alerts that you send or your association sends. And anybody who assists the GR team with facts, figures, research on the company or on your industry. So you can see it's a lot of detailed information that we need to collect. One of the enforcement mechanisms in the LDA is audits by the GAO, and a random sample of reports is audited twice a year, and your chance of getting selected for audit is not high, but it's also not trivial. And the GAO requires adequate records to back up your reported cost and issue information. And after we've gathered that information, this tool will provide that great audit trail should you be audited by the GAO or by an internal audit. And it'll also provide those JAC Act certifications and support for the gift rule certifications. So with that, I'm going to switch over and show you the tool itself. But Laura, do we have any questions yet?
We do not have any questions at this time.
So the tool is web-based and is accessible through any web browser. And we'll set up for each client a logon scheme. This could be done by SSO with your organization, or we'll just simply set up a login that uses an employee ID number, work email, something like that, anything unique to the user. And once the user logs in, you're going to see that the survey's now recognized this person. We don't have to enter that information, and so we know who's answering the survey. The first thing I want to point out is that, as you'll see, this is a very detailed survey that's intended to collect all of that information I went over. But we start out with just 4 questions and a certification. And so if you have employees who only occasionally engage in lobbying activity and maybe come back in some quarters and don't have any at all, it's very easy for them to just go through and say no, 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 go to the last question, certify, and they're done. So by making it easy for employees to complete the survey, we're going to increase your response rate and increase the activity of your information collection. However, right here in the same survey, for the employees such as listed lobbyists or others who do have detailed responses, they're going to answer yes, and then the questions are going to pop out and ask for the more detailed information that we need. We also have the ability to hide or reveal questions based on employee status. And so, for instance, for those JAC Act certifications I mentioned, those apply only to your listed lobbyists. You don't have to ask all of your employees if they've been convicted of a felony every quarter. And so we'll show those questions only to the employees who need to answer them. So the LDA requires general issue codes. And in this demo data set, we've loaded up all of the issue codes that are applicable under the LDA. For most of our clients, we'll restrict this list because typically one company is lobbying in 4 or 5 issue areas over and over again. And so we'll just give respondents from that company those 4 or 5 choices. And obviously, if you add something, we'll add that to the list. It makes it a little easier to complete. This is also a multi-select, and so if you lobby in 2 or 3 areas, you can select all of those. Likewise, with the agency list, again, we've loaded up the complete agency list from the LDA here, but we can restrict that down based on the client to just the House and the Senate and any executive agencies who you're routinely engaged with. Here, the user is going to enter their specific lobbying activities, the bill numbers, titles, portions of the bill, issues that they're going to lobby on. And that'll take care of the first part of the report. We also ask about lobbying support activities because there are going to be some people in many organizations who don't lobby themselves, but who provide support. So we ask about that separately. And then we combine the hours here in question 1 and question 2 because that's all one bucket on the lobbying report. In other words, the report doesn't care whether you're doing lobbying activity directly or lobbying support activity. We just need the number of hours, so the employee is going to enter it here rather than asking it separately for direct lobbying and lobbying support. You've got to report expenses if you had those. So here again, we have a pop out. Excuse me, we don't here. And we're going to report some of the expenses. We've also got the ability to include an email link here if you want people to be able to email additional information. As I'll show you in a minute, as an alternative or an addition, we can also have a document upload at this point. So, for instance, people can upload expense reports or other supporting documentation. Dues payments to trade associations, the lobbying portion of those is also a required item in your cost calculations. And so if the user has authorized payment in any of those, we ask about the name of the association, date, amount, and the percentage devoted to lobbying. This is iterative, and so if the user has paid dues to 2 organizations, they can simply hit the add another button and go ahead and add a second or third, however many you need. Also note the Save as Draft button over here. If a user is completing the survey and finds out they don't have all the documentation they need, they can simply hit Save as Draft, close the survey, or log out. And when they come back, they'll be right back where they started. They won't lose their information because they didn't complete the survey all in one pass. Events honoring elected officials, inaugural committees, presidential libraries, so on like that, are also required to be reported actually on the LD203 report. We've combined this into a single survey for ease. And if anyone has those payments, then they're going to click yes. And we'll ask for more detailed information about the type of the payment. And again, the name, the date, the official, and so on like that. And as with the previous question, you can keep adding payments until you're done. Finally, on this survey, every 6 months on the LD203, someone is required to certify on behalf of your association or company that no one at the company has violated the House or Senate gift or travel rules. And so we provide the certification box here. We've got links to the gift and travel rules that you can just click and go to. And then the certification and the employee submits. So that's a survey that was built to collect all the information that anybody would need for LD2 and 203 reports. And in terms of an output, we then produce the spreadsheet, which is going to aggregate all of the responses by everyone who responded to the survey. Will include employee ID numbers, if you have those, names and sort, and then all the responses, which is your basic audit trail. We'll also separately pull out employees who reported time. And a lot of our clients will actually provide us with pay bands. We'll be able to put those employees in pay bands, multiply by their time, and come up with cost figure for the employees. For companies who don't use pay bands or don't want to provide that information, we'll actually take this part of the spreadsheet, send it back to the HR payroll office, and the company's payroll office will do calculations and come back to us with a total number for all the employees at that organization who did lobbying. Separately, we'll capture the employee expenses because those have to be reported pretty well directly. And then we'll provide a roll-up for you. So you'll see all of your expenses by your outside firms, association dues, total for employee time, travel, so on like that, and the total number, which of course will be rounded to the nearest $10,000 for the LD2 report itself. So that's that big survey and the export. I've got another survey build that I want to show you, but why don't I pause and ask you, Laura, if there are any questions at this point?
Hey, Dave. Yes, we actually do have one question that came in from an attendee. The question was, would it be required to disclose in a lobbying report a CEO's conversation with CMS administrator regarding CARES Act funding and distribution?
So that's a great question. And the conversations or what you have to report are interactions with covered officials. And I believe the CMS administrator is a covered official. It's generally people who are subject to presidential appointment and Senate confirmation. And there are exceptions to the rules, but generally speaking, a phone conversation is not going to fall within one of those exceptions. And so you would definitely want to capture that time and include the value of the CEO's time and the employee's time in your lobbying cost survey. As long as the CEO isn't a listed lobbyist, presumably won't be because he or she won't be because they don't spend more than 20% of their time lobbying, you wouldn't have to report the substance of the contact of the agency, but you certainly would need to capture the time. So at this point, I want to show you a second build that we did for a different client. I'll show you a bit about the tool's flexibility and possibilities for dealing with this in a.
And Dave, this is Will. While you're logging in, I want to go ahead and be able to show for the survey tool itself that it is available on mobile view. So the advantage of all the sites we put together at Aristotle is they're built to be mobile responsive. So in this case, if you're going to be logging in via your laptop, or if somebody's going to be logging in on their phone, tablet, etc., the survey will automatically scale appropriately so it will view correctly on their page. And this can simply be bookmarked and then accessed at any point when you need to fill in the survey.
So as I mentioned, this was a build based on a survey for a different client, and it's a shorter survey. They had fewer respondents and felt they could handle a less detailed, less granular set of responses. We did put some definitions on the survey so that the respondents can see what the statutory and regulatory definitions are and help answer some of the questions that they might have as they're filling out the survey. We simply asked people if they had federal lobbying activity. If they did, we asked about the hours, description, and expenses, which is really the broad categories of information you need to prepare the report. In this case, because we didn't ask about the specific lobbying issues, agencies, and so on, we work with the client's government relations team to kind of fill that information in. Usually, for instance, in the description, the respondent will put who it was they were talking to, and we can identify the agency that way. And we'll be able to categorize the lobbying area because we're familiar with the LDA lobbying groups. Second question is simply whether the individual knew of anybody else in the organization who participated in lobbying activities. If they did, they list their name. That allows us to add that person to the survey list and collect the additional information we need. And then it asks about supporting documents. As I mentioned, we've got the option, and this just pops out like any Microsoft application. You can simply select a file and upload that to the survey, and we'll have that along with the survey results. So this also will give you an idea of how we can adapt this to state lobbying requirements, which are going to be very different from, in some cases, the federal requirements. And so for states, if we have to ask about bill numbers, about gifts for legislators, other information of that sort. And as you can see, we can set up the questionnaire in a very different way for those purposes. So that shows you both a long version and a short version of the survey tool and output. Again, why don't I stop and see if there are questions?
We don't have any questions right now, Dave.
Then I think we're ready for close. If anybody does have questions after the webinar, they certainly can feel free to contact me at david.mason@aristotle.com. And I think Will's got some further contact information.
Thanks, Dave, for sharing the information today. More importantly, I want to thank everyone who joined us. I hope you found this webinar helpful and relevant, especially given the unusual circumstances we're all dealing with. As a reminder, we'll be sending out this recording to all attendees, including the PowerPoint showed today. For those of you on the call that would like to receive more information about the tools or services and ready to leverage them for your programs, please contact your account manager and your existing Aristotle client, or feel free to send an email to sales@aristotle.com. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the week.